Hello everyone, I'm Belle and I'll be walking you through one of my patterns, the Claudia Blouse. The first step I usually start with is taking an inventory and making sure I have all pieces cut out from the pattern before starting, including the interfacings. It's important to add a notch on all 4 of the center front button plackets, stack them together and make a notch at 2 centimeters. This will be important for the assembly of the collar and the neckline later. At this point, I'm really just making sure that I have 2 mirrored pairs of the 2 centimeter front notch. Of course, apply your interfacing, baking it on with your iron. No steam. Only the front part of the sleeve cuffs and the front part of the center front placket get the interfacing. Here's something that I do that really helps me later with finishing things like cuffs. Lay the lining with right sides together on the cuff, fold and press the seam allowance where the sleeve will be attached. Fold your collar tie pieces in half and press them to make a mark. Sleeves always have a right and left side. Double notches always indicate the back. Be sure to have mirrored pieces for your sleeves and all your notches marked. The sleeve placket is an advanced design element and really elevates your work when making blouses. Make sure the notches are present here too. If it helps you, as it does for me, use a fabric pencil to mark your stitch box. The notch for the placket placement should already be present at the cuff seam. Plackets should have the peak closest to the center, not the outside. Pre-folding and pressing seam allowances is always helpful for later. Use the lines that you marked for your stitch box to bring in the folded edges. Just past those lines. You can refer to the placket pattern to see where the fold lines should be. Getting that perfect triangle peak is easier than you think. Fold the highest point of the placket backwards on itself like this, keeping your pressed seam allowances folded as they are too. Stitch across the top at about 1/4 inch. At this point, you're going to want to snip that little bit just up to that stitch line. And this is how you turn it out. I'm really glad my marked stitch box came through here. That way you can really see what it should look like. That line in the center is where we're going to slash up in a minute. Just be sure to keep your needle down when turning those tight corners. I feel I need to stress here that when we slash up that middle line, we don't go up all the way. Stop about 1/4 inch or 1 centimeter from the top of the stitch box so you can cut diagonally right up to the corners, and try not to snip your stitches. Turn it all out to the right side of the fabric and you're going to start seeing your placket make a little more sense. Pressing all your bits down at this point is helpful too, but pressing is usually helpful for lots of reasons. Once everything is pressed down, top stitch each side of the placket closed. I usually start with the narrow side, finish, and close the wider side. On the wider side, you're going to try to follow tightly around that perfect peak you made, down the other side and finish with a box that keeps that messy part in. It looks like a fold or a pocket on the wrong side of the sleeve, so you stitch the box around that when you're closing the placket. When you're done, it should look like this. You could choose to top stitch the entire placket as well, and this is common, but it's up to you. Just like the sleeve cuffs, I'm taking each pair of the center front placket and pre-folding the seam allowance ahead of time. Again, be sure you're working with mirror images. You can use that notch at the top as a guide. The edge it's closest to is the side it gets sewn onto on the bodice. Same with the bodice ruffles. The straight edge is finished with a narrow rolled hem, and I use a special foot for that. But make sure you have opposite pieces with that rolled hem on the wrong side of the fabric. Not shown here is my mistake in not doing that, and I had to recut another ruffle, so don't rush it. Finally, we can get started with the bigger pieces. I usually try to get the small bits out of the way first, that way they're ready to go when it comes time for the main assembly of stuff. I start with the bodice princess seams and match my notches on the curves and ends. Use pins to help you with the placement of that tight curve. Remember that the concave curves, the curves going in, are stretchy, so you can use that to your advantage when you're matching it to the convex curve, the outie curve. And this blouse pattern has a center seam in the back that's also shaped, so go ahead and sew that too. For the collar tie, match your pressed center marks and sew all around, leaving a gap between the notches for turning out. Snip up to the stitch line at an angle and press one side up at the seam allowance. Also, don't cut your corners. Fold and press the seam allowance all around and at the corners too. At this point, you can continue the main assembly process with the sleeves and the front and back bodice pieces, always right sides together, of course. Here I'm overlocking my finished seams just to clean up the insides. If you don't have the benefit of a serger or an overlock machine, don't sweat it. You can leave the seams as is or use a zigzag stitch instead. Machine baste the curved edges of your ruffles with a long stitch setting. On the sleeve cuffs with interfacing, fold in half and make a notch at the center. Do the same with the ruffles. Mark in at about 1.5 centimeters to place the edges of the cuff ruffles. Pull the bobbin thread on the basting to gather the ruffles into place. For the bodice ruffles, find the center of the ruffle placement by folding the waistline notch up to the neckline. Repeat the same process as you did for the cuffs. To make life easier, press all of the ruffles down flat so that they're easier to sew on. Just trust me on this one. Now you can start assembling the cuffs. Place the pre-folded piece on top of the ruffled piece, making sure your pre-folded seam allowance is facing up. Start sewing at the creased line, not on the edge. Stitch all around 3 sides at 1 centimeter seam allowance, and end at the other crease line. There should be a 1 centimeter gap where it will be attached to the sleeve. Make sure to fold your corners and turn the corners this way to get nice, crisp, sharp corners. If you need to use something like an awl or the pointy end of a seam ripper to tease out that corner, just try to be careful about it. A lot of sewists cut their corners here, so I feel this step is important to show more than once. Do it this way and you'll never get wonky corners again. Make sure to mark your button placements on the cuffs with a pencil, and then begin the process of attaching the cuffs to the sleeves, making sure that there is a flat part 5 centimeters on each side. Gather in the middle. You also want to make sure that your buttonholes are on the wider part of the placket. Okay, so here you definitely need to make sure you have opposite pairs. This is the part that has a unique neckline design element. Right sides together, sew the interfaced center front straight down on the center front bodice. Remember, the notch at the top should be closer to the bodice edge than on the outside edge. Place the lining of the center front placket on your interfaced placket, right sides together. Make a mark 1 centimeter below the notched point, and this is where you're going to start sewing. Sew across this way and turn your corner with the needle down, remembering your seam allowance is 1 centimeter. Before you turn this out, snip up to that stitch line at an angle, again being careful not to cut through the stitch line, and same as with the cuffs, fold the corners and turn this out. Now you should have a little tab that will be the end of the collar placement section. To finish closing the cuffs, you can start folding the seam allowance ends on each other like I'm doing here. By doing this method, you can keep any raw edges from showing through by essentially wrapping them in each other. Press the seams inward on the center front placket. Both the cuffs and the placket will be closed by top stitching. Fold the bottom edge of the placket on itself and stitch straight across up to the creased seam allowance line. So go ahead and start top stitching the placket closed, being mindful of the underlayer. You want to make sure that the top stitching catches it. Ideally you want to be as neat as possible, but it's okay if it doesn't look perfect on the back side. And of course, do the same thing for the cuffs. Now these sleeves are not very poofy, but they do have a little bit of gathering at the top, at about 5 centimeters on each side of the center top of the curve. Mark these with a notch by folding it in half and machine baste between those notches. Start setting the sleeve by matching the seams at the bottom of the armscye and the sleeve. Like the cuffs, you want to set the sleeves flat on either side, starting at the bottom and then working your way up to the beginning of the gathering notch. We're almost done! Now we're just pinning the collar to the neckline, again doing the best we can to match that gap section to the neckline between those 2 tabs we made on the placket. If it's not perfectly aligned, you can always close up any excess with top stitching on the collar. Like we did for closing the cuffs, we're wrapping that pre-folded edge of the collar around that raw tab and top stitching the neckline closed. As always, I recommend that you press the seam allowance into the neckline before you start this process. Once that's done, we're going to reinforce that little tab section with some back stitching before continuing on with top stitching all the way around the center front placket, and then rolling up the hem at the same time. Because everyone's buttonhole methods and capabilities are different, I didn't include a demonstration of that part of the process. I also didn't include a button placement guide in the pattern, as I wanted to allow freedom to the maker for adding as many buttons as they wanted. Generally, a blouse like this is fine with about 6 buttons down the center of the front placket. The first button should always be at about 1 centimeter from the finished edge. I went with placements at about 8 centimeters apart for each one after that. I hope this instructional video was helpful to you, and look forward to seeing everyone's creations using this pattern. Please feel free to share what you've created with me on Discord or Instagram. The pattern is currently available in printed and digital formats on my Square shop, linked down below. That's all for now, and as always, happy sewing! This video and my work would not have been made possible without my amazing Patreon supporters. Because of their support, I started using an awesome new program for clothing design, pattern making, and grading called Clo3D. So thank you, my belle amie, for everything you've given me. Look forward to more awesome patterns soon. Until next time!